You're good.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Ajit Naik with Baumann Consulting. Just wanted to go through with you guys today a little bit about federal tax incentives that are available. So this presentation is initially just about 179D, which is a popular tax incentive for energy efficiency, but that's not the only subject. We're going to talk about federal incentives for renewable energy, as well as federal incentives for energy efficient homes. Just a little agenda. So we're going to start out with a little bit of context with an overview of the United States energy use today. We're going to talk about the federal commercial energy incentive, 179D. We're going to talk about the federal residential energy efficiency incentive for energy efficient homes. That's called 45L. And finally, the federal renewable energy efficiency incentive, that is Section 48 of the US tax code. So this is a pretty dry subject, tax incentives, but it really, there's a lot of money in this. If you're working in the sustainability space, that it really will help close the gap. So it's something that anybody who works in building design, construction, ownership, or operation should really be aware of. So a few learning objectives. I want to go through and make sure that everybody attending today understands the history and the motivation behind these federal tax incentives. Like, why are these things like a thing? And then I also want to talk about how the deduction can help commercial building projects close the budget gap. Really, like when people think, oh, this is too expensive, like how you can more effectively leverage that. Oh, sorry, my screen seems to be doing its own thing. Lastly, want to understand how you can use 45L to help make efficient houses more possible. And finally, how we can leverage the renewable energy to make sure that solar, wind, all those nice things don't get beaten. Like I said, I'm Ajit Naik. I work in building energy modeling, commissioning, and I find myself in a position to consult frequently for architects, engineers, building owners, and property developers on how to most effectively leverage these incentives and make smart design decisions. A few slides about our company, which I'm going to skip over and start off with energy usage by buildings today. So basically, what we're looking at here is a picture of the share of the United States total energy consumption between 1980 and 2010. Fortunately, I couldn't find a graph with a few more years recent data, but the picture basically looks the same. For the last 30, 40 years, buildings have represented anywhere from 30 to 40% of our annual energy use, right? That's like a significant amount of energy. And if anybody's concerned about reducing our energy use or the attendant environmental impact associated with them, really that's our first and foremost biggest energy user in the United States. Our energy usage since 1950 has been growing. So yeah, not only has that share been there, but the total amount of energy use that we have been using has been growing. It makes sense. The United States as a whole has been growing, especially starting with the post-war boom in the 50s. We really see that energy usage as buildings went out, as the country suburbanized, really energy use skyrocketed. In the 70s, there were energy crises, right? There, the price of energy went up. People were waiting in long lines for gas. Generally, political and geopolitical considerations led the US to realize, hey, this level of growth might not be sustainable if we don't shore up our energy supply. So there were several things that have happened since then. And as you can kind of see, while the rate has continued to go up, it hasn't really skyrocketed in the way that it did, in the 50s through the 70s before we really started thinking about, hey, what do we need to do to manage our energy and environmental impacts? So one of the things that municipalities and we did as a nation and a society was to implement building energy codes. So we all know that we need to get a permit to construct or to modify a building, but previously the energy wasn't regulated in any way. So a lot of great minds got back together in the 70s, again, right at the height of the energy crisis, to develop ASHRAE Standard 90. 90-1975, first building energy standard that was there in the United States. So this regulated energy use in terms of, what kind of insulation you might need, what kind of, HVAC efficiency minimum levels would be acceptable, how much lighting you could install in new buildings. So it was the first crack at really making this happen. This code eventually, as you can see in the 80s, it switched to something called the MEC. This is the Model Energy Code, right? The idea was, hey, we should kind of create this standard energy code, which people can look at and then adopt as they see fit, appropriately for their local, municipality, jurisdiction, wherever it is. These kind of existed in parallel, right? Like the underlying ASHRAE standard where all the engineers kind of get together. And then this model code where it was kind of like, hey, how do we convert this technical standard into something that like can live and be, applicable for everybody. So ASHRAE was updated, more often, and the model energy code, periodically adopted the requirements of ASHRAE, like kind of following along. As it went along, things kind of slowly improved with time, but again, in the early 2000s, there was another energy crisis associated with the Iraq War. I was in college at that time. I remember paying $4.50 for a gallon of gas on, a college intern salary back in 2004. It was pretty tough. So again, similarly, due to shocks, of energy availability, we started to see another spate of energy efficiency improvements. Somewhere in the early 2000s, the MEC was renamed the IECC from the Model Energy Code to the International Energy Conservation Code, acknowledging that jurisdictions in Canada, Mexico, and other countries were also starting to look at this code and use it as a basis for adopting. 90.1, 90 eventually became 90.1, which was focused solely on commercial buildings, whereas the IECC had both residential and commercial provisions. So they kind of diverged a little bit with time, but as you can see, they both kind of led to significant improvements. And today, the most current versions of the code represent, 40 to 50% reductions over what the energy standard was back in 1975. So, under the most modern versions of the code, to build a new construction building or to renovate an existing building, the outcome is designed, it's regulated to be, 50% more, efficient than what was present in 75, which itself was a huge step from nothing, which was a requirement before 1975. In DC, the energy code is pretty kind of, I don't want to say convoluted, but it is like a mishmash of things from the IECC, from various versions of 2019. So overall, it functions about at the efficiency level of 90.1 2016 and IECC 2018. So that's kind of where in Washington, DC, the energy code lands. Not quite the latest level, but we're operating right near the top. So you can see this effect very, very clearly when we come back to this graph, right? So like since 1980, really, we had this like, spike. Not only is it getting faster, but the rate of increase is getting faster, where we really kind of peaked out like on this rate of increase, like right until things started getting expensive, in the 70s during OPEC and, Iran crisis, all of that. And then we really truly see the impact of these energy codes, right? Like the rate of population growth in the US was still like skyrocketing at this time, right? Like people were moving here, we were having babies, like all of this stuff was happening, but the rate of energy use didn't track all of that growth, right? Like we really started to see while the energy use was going up, the rate at which it was going up is clearly impacted by these regulations. And especially if we start to look at like after 2004, where that second kind of crisis and like increased focus on regulation happened, it almost started to flatline. Right? Like if you really zoom in here, like we actually have things go down. And since 2000, our overall energy use hasn't really increased the same way. That's incredible. Like it's despite population growth, despite expansion of buildings and services and everything, we're actually for the first time, like kind of flatlining our energy usage, right? Like that's a big deal and a clear sign that this regulation is having an effect. At the same kind of sign too, we note that, really dirty things like coal are a lower usage of our energy usage over time. But really, our goal behind these energy regulations doesn't impact, where these fuels come from, but it really regulates how much energy we're using. So, and we see again, like based on projections, like this real impact. So if we had done nothing in the 80s, like in the 70s, if we did no, energy code, if we hadn't developed the EPA, if we hadn't started regulating, like auto emissions, if we were all still using leaded gas, like this is what would have happened, right? Like our energy usage would have been almost 200 quads. That's a lot, right? But with all these, some things are due to just structural changes in the economy, right? Things get more expensive, people buy less. But energy efficiency regulations were the lion's share of it. And as a result, since 1980, we've kept our energy use, down to just a few percent increase, as opposed to, nearly quadrupling, which is what we were on track to do. So like, yay us, like good job. Sometimes smart regulations make sense, and we see this, right? Like it worked. But now, since especially the 90s and the 2000s, it isn't just about clean air, water, holes in the ozone, all that. Like we've realized that carbon emissions are important as well, too, right? These are causing climate change. They, create these instabilities. It really is a secondary goal. So not only, reducing energy costs, making sure that the US is able to provide and kind of serve all of our own energy needs, we're also now concerned about carbon emissions, right? And so when we look at carbon emissions over time, carbon emissions actually peaked in 2005, right? Like that's a crazy fact, right? Like, so not only did we like start, kind of flatline our energy efficiency, changes to the grid, right? Like focuses on, not burning coal, conversions to natural gas, right? Like that was a big thing that happened, in the late Bush years, like early Obama years, where there was, a big expansion of fracking. And that for the first time, we started to, produce all of our own energy use. Well, it turns out that natural gas is a lot more efficient than coal in terms of reducing carbon emissions, not as good as, other things like renewable energy or nuclear power in terms of carbon emissions, but it is better than coal. And we see that fact, energy efficiency combined with, switching to a cleaner grid actually started to drive down our carbon emissions. So today, in the mid 2020s, we are actually emitting less than we did in 2005, using about the same amount of energy, despite population growth, despite building expansion. And these are all a sign that, regulations that we've implemented to this point have worked. Some of those have been, regulations forbidding you from doing those things, but some of them have been incentives as well, too. And some of the incentives that we're talking about today, originate right around 2005, and we can see those played a part of the picture as well. So one of the problems that we have too, and sorry, this should say, is existing buildings. There are tons of buildings in DC itself that were built in the 60s and the 70s at the worst of the excesses before, things were regulated, that still exist today that, haven't really been renovated in a big way. And, now we have regulations like DC BEPS that, actually mandate, hey, if you're using too much energy, you're going to get penalized. And, it really is driving building owners towards like thinking about how they can improve their buildings. And, this problem doesn't just exist in DC, it's everywhere. By 2040, 2/3 of the global building stock will be existing buildings, right? Like they don't get captured by, energy codes, like unless they, seek renovations or expansions. And a lot of buildings aren't doing that, So how do we address these problems of existing buildings, And one of those ways like BEPS from the regulation side has been, effective in places like DC, New York's local law 97. We see these standards starting to proliferate, but really they're a new thing, right? Like the stick that regulates energy usage. But this problem of existing buildings and how to improve them, how to address them was recognized a long time ago. And one of the problems with it is value engineering, right? Like I really love this picture because it illustrates a situation that many of you who are designers have probably been experienced with, where what you kind of want to do or your initial concept really doesn't really reflect what you end up with at the end, right? And this is especially true of energy efficiency and sustainability design features, right? We might start to think that we have the money in the room and the goal for all of these, but when things come to the chopping block, when costs come back too high, really fortunately or not, solar panels, triple pane glazing, high efficiency HVAC systems, all of these things that we know are good for reducing energy use, reducing carbon emissions, like they often are the first on the chopping block. So, recognizing this problem, the IRS was like, wow, we're losing out on revenue, not producing our energy usage domestically. We're losing out on revenue when people are changing their buying habits. How do we incentivize building owners and design teams to incorporate energy efficient strategies in their public and commercial buildings to manage the country's energy demand and save the government more money than it forgoes, right? Because really, this is bad. Like if everybody is making like short penny wise, pound foolish decisions, like the US government like has to go out of house and make these energy contracts with foreign countries, sometimes hostile, pay a higher rate, sacrifice geopolitical objectives if we can't produce our own energy. So this was really their motivation. It's like we save money if we can produce it all domestically. How can we incentivize people to stop using so much energy so that we can save, money in the big picture? That was really ultimately their goal. And so the tax wonks came up with this strategy, the 179D commercial energy efficiency tax deduction, right? So this is a energy efficiency deduction. So that means if you owe taxes, right, like if you have taxable liability, you are able to reduce that taxable liability by crediting the money that you spend on energy efficiency. You'll reduce your tax burden. If you don't have any tax burden, like you can't claim this because it is a deduction and not a tax credit. So a lot of people can claim it. So even tenants, like even if you're working on a fit out of a base building, you also may be eligible to claim this. The owner has already claimed it. The amount that you can claim is limited, but you can do it. If these improvements, so if we're talking that they're a government property, be it federal, state, local government, even like on native land, you can still take this credit. The design team, provided they have, the tax liability, can take this deduction. So, it was the idea here was like, hey, like, even all commercial owners, even the federal government, like, let's help find, people find ways to do this. And they did all these analytics, and no matter which way they sliced it, they found that offering these incentives actually saved, it raised the government's revenues in the long run, not reduced them. This doesn't apply to like other non-tax paying entities like NGOs or churches. Like if you're working on one of those properties, like this isn't available to you. But if you're working on like a federal, state, municipal, any kind of like property, government property there, like a public school or something like that, you can claim this anywhere in all 50 states. There is like a whole set of information available about this. You can find some more information in the link here. We will be sharing this presentation after the fact. The tax deduction is quite a bit of money, actually. So it for buildings open before January 1st, it is $1.88 a square foot. And for buildings after January 1st, it's $5. It's up to $5 a square foot. So, the cost of construction in DC, $400 or $500 per square foot, it might not seem like a huge amount, but that amount of money is enough. It does represent like the cost of, efficient windows, maybe higher efficiency HVAC systems, maybe, those daylighting controls that you couldn't afford. It really is meant to help you like kind of be able to justify including those things in the cost of construction. So a little bit about the history of 179D. So it has its origins in the Energy Policy Act of 2005. So this was passed by the George Bush administration, with a full Republican Congress and Senate. So really, I bring that up to say that this was motivated by energy independence, right? Like really more so initially than like environmental impact. It was driven by energy independence and energy security. It's been very popular with everybody because it makes sense. Like the numbers speak for themselves. So it has been renewed continuously by every administration ever since. There was increase. It was actually made permanent in 2021 by the Biden administration. And then in 2022, they raised the benefits from that $1.88 per square foot maximum up to the $5 per square foot maximum. So how it works. So basically, fundamentally, 179D is an energy model, right? So you need to hire a qualified energy modeler who has got a BEMP certification. There is a guideline that the government publishes on how you develop your energy model. But basically, it works similar to a LEED or a code energy modeling process, if you guys are familiar with that. And then, once you prove your building performance via the energy model, after you've implemented everything, there has to be an inspection. by any licensed engineer, architect, or contractor. They don't have to be licensed in a particular state, just anywhere. They have to go and, verify that what was in the energy model is actually present. Take pictures of it, just kind of note it. So it's this two-step process of the model and verification. And there's a guideline that states, how to model it and how to verify. The energy modeling process is similar to code and LEED and other programs. For those that aren't familiar with how it works, the energy modeling process for compliance basically requires you to create two energy models. There's one of your actual building, which is represented by this image at the top left. And then there is you make a second energy model of an imaginary baseline building, which is like the same shape and program as yours, but it has like all code minimum, everything else. Like if you have fancy glass, it's got code minimum glass. If you've got like a cool HVAC system, it has like a bog standard HVAC system. If you've got LED lights, it has, whatever maximum amount of lights it's allowed to have by code. So basically you kind of compare your building like against, this fictional baseline building, and you kind of see how much better you are than that fictional baseline. And the better you are than the baseline, the more money you get incentivized through this tax deduction. So fundamentally, make an energy model, prove that you're certain percent better than the baseline, and you'll get kind of money. You'll get an incentive based on this happening. Again, there's a verification component to it, so you cannot submit until after all of the renovation is complete, or the new construction is done, or the retrofit is implemented, since it has to be verified. Yeah, you can claim it. The performance requirements, again, also depend on when your building was placed into service. So if you have, for example, if you made energy efficiency upgrades in 2019 that qualify for this and didn't claim the deduction, you can still claim it. It's not too late, right? But you have to look at the standards that were in force back in.
We need confirmation, and however you get it, if it's not today, like the fact that you've tried 2 weeks, I feel like we should have priority. And
excuse me, if you guys could mute yourself, that would be appreciated. Thank you. So just back to here, if you were placed in before 2020, you were looking at 90.127 2007, an older version. And for projects that were done more recently, you have to use the most recent version of 90.1 that existed at the time that your building was placed into service. So it's been 2019, might now be 2022 as of this month, but kind of a rolling basis. So again, if you worked on a project that was really energy efficient, and, you don't know if somebody claimed this deduction, it's worth asking, right? Like you can go back. It's just that you have to play by the rules that were in effect when you did the work. In DC, we again have the 2017 DC Energy Code. That's like the current energy code. So for new construction buildings, it's based on 90.1 2013. Again, it's a little bit more efficient than that. So it's more or less similar to the 179D requirements. You're not too far off. So if you're already designing a public project in DC, right, that has to comply with Appendix Z, like a public school. I mean, you're an architect or an engineer working on a public project like that, your ears should be pricking that in DC you might be able to claim this deduction, even if the since your client is the DGS or some other organization can't do it, you can claim it if you design an efficient building. There is an alternative also for existing buildings. If a building is more than 5 years old and you're retrofitting it, you can actually you don't have to do an energy model, you can just show utility bills. So like, let's say you're working on a project for BEPS, right? And you already are doing this work anyway, and you have to show your utility bills before and after benchmarking. It's required, in the city, the district anyway. And if you can prove like, hey, for BEPS, I was gonna pay a penalty, and now, I made all these, these improvements, you can actually use that same documentation to claim this incentive as well. It's not true for new buildings, but it is true for existing. So fundamentally, how to claim it is like you hire the consultants, the energy modeler, and if needed, an architect, engineer, or contractor to develop this report. There's a form which gets submitted as part of your tax filing, which your tax preparer can do. You just need to file the form and this report, and that's it. There is no third-party review. There is like the GBCI or permit reviewer. The due diligence is the requirement that you hire a qualified energy modeler and that it be verified by a licensed contractor, architect, or engineer. The IRS does not have energy modelers or architects on staff to review this the way the GBCI does. Who can claim it? As I mentioned, owners primarily and developers, but also architects and engineers. Anybody who is like a stamping designer, like even the structural can claim this stuff, right? If they stamped on the design team. So if the owner can't claim it or doesn't want to claim it, like sometimes like REITs, if you claim this, it can impact shareholder distributions. So they have reasons they might not want to do it. So in those cases, if you're an architect or an engineer, and you're wondering how to reduce your taxes, this is a good option. Again, it can be new construction or retrofits, just any type of retrofit that impacts energy efficiency. Envelope upgrades, HVAC, domestic hot water upgrades, lighting upgrades, any of these things qualify. So again, sorry, repeating this page. This is the form that I was referring to, form 7205. That is like you can click that link, and that's literally the form your tax preparer needs to do. All right. So again, the value for what you get is determines on when you submitted it, when you spent the money. So if it was before January 1st, 2023, you got up to $1.88 per square foot by demonstrating a 50% savings improvement over that imaginary baseline. If you only did some things, like if you only put in an envelope upgrade or a lighting upgrade or HVAC upgrade, there's lower thresholds to claim, but then you also get less money for it, down to 63 cents a square foot. Like you still can be a lot. Like if you were doing like a lighting upgrade in a big warehouse, like a distribution center, those are usually 63 cents a square foot on top of a 1,000,000 square foot warehouse. It's significant. They're also, but if you spent money after January 1st, 2003, the savings have actually increased, right? So if you don't use prevailing wage requirements, so now there's like union requirements, you can get between 50 cents and $1 per square foot by beating the baseline anywhere from 25% all the way up to 50%. So you got to be 25% better till you're in the money, right? And then after you're in the money, you can get more money all the way up to beating it by 50%, up to $1 per square foot. Now, if you do meet prevailing wage and labor requirements, it's significantly enhanced. My apologies, there's a typo on here. This should be $2.50 a square foot at the minimum, up to $5 a square foot at the maximum. So works the same way. So for projects since last year, new construction, anything you're doing now, 50 cents to $1 if you're using non-prevailing wage, $2.50 to $5 if you're using prevailing wage to get on top of this. Either way, whether or not you're doing it, if you're designing an efficient building, this is money on the table, for you to collect. Those prevailing wage requirements are published by the U.S. Department of Labor. There's some apprenticeship requirements as well, listed here. And I won't go too much into detail with this, but if you're, in a larger municipality like DC, working on a government project, for example, likely this is already the case. Just some examples on what that would look like. So before January 1st, 2023, 50,000 square foot building, would get up any $15,000 to $31,000 if it was using one of the minimum paths, or, if it claimed the whole building energy modeling deduction, it could get up all the way to 94,000. For a 1,000,000 square foot building, we clearly see, that we get big benefits from doing this. So especially lighting renovations and big distribution centers is like an easy target for this. After January 1st, 2023, the landscape looks different. You really don't get much money for smaller buildings without prevailing wage requirements, but you can get quite a bit, right? Like if you max this out and are using prevailing wage, you can get $250,000 for a 50,000 square foot building. That's there's a significant amount of money. Same thing, you get $5 million for a distribution center or a warehouse doing this. So really, significant cash value for doing this. After January 1st, 2023, where you can successfully use prevailing wage labor. So I'll stop there actually and see, are there any questions specifically about 179D before we move on to the other incentives? All right, and feel free to chime in and stop me or put a question in the chat as we go.
I have a quick question, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you said we can't sell those tax credit in the market. right?
They're not tax credits. They're deductions, right? So
You
yeah.
cannot sell this privilege to anybody.
No, like
Right.
it can only be claimed by the owner or by one of the stamping design team, like the architect or the structural or one of the engineers.
This is the same for other incentives or only for this one?
This is just for the 179D deduction.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
So other ones work in different ways, and we'll get to that right now.
Thank you.
So
Another question quickly.
Yeah.
I don't, maybe you'll speak to this later, but is this just going to focus on the energy savings, or what about water investments as well?
No, it's only energy efficiency savings. It doesn't mention water at all. You can like qualify like low flow fixtures, right, that impact domestic water heating because that's an energy related thing. So you can claim it for that. But you know, you cannot claim like thing like a reduction in potable water or irrigation. It's purely focused on energy efficiency.
Okay, so green infrastructure that would have energy, savings indirectly through cooling down ambient temperatures outside.
If it's an envelope measure and it can be captured within the energy model per like what the requirements are, then yes. If it can't be captured in the model, then no. So for an example, like you could capture like external shading, right? Like let's say the model rules allow you to take advantage of like say, automatically controlled exterior shading that limits your cooling load. Yes, you can take credit for that. If you are like building, planting trees and creating like a higher tree canopy that lowers like the average, experienced temperature in your microclimate, no, that's not something you can take credit for. You have to use like a standard weather file for it. Hope that helps.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, great. Any other questions on 179D? All right. So moving on to section 45L. So 179D, purely a commercial thing. Governments can take advantage of it too, but it's not for homes. So what about homes? Enter the 45L tax credit. This, I would say, is actually relevant. This is probably relevant to everybody here. If you own a property, if you own a home, you yourself, literally as a homeowner, can claim this credit. I bought a heat pump and was able to claim savings through this. So this is like, even if you aren't working in design and construction, like, and you own a home, like this is relevant to you by virtue of being a homeowner. So while 179D is for commercial, 45L is for homeowners, right? So it basically allows the homeowner or the eligible contractor to claim some money for being a certain level of energy efficient. So there's again a form that you submit along with some reporting and documentation, and you get the credit. This is a tax credit, right? So it doesn't matter if you have any tax liability or not. This is a credit that you get this money, even if you owe $0 to the government and you perfectly balanced it and you claimed all your business losses, you can still do this. This is a tax credit, not a deduction. So again, only owners, only the developers or home builders, architects, engineers cannot claim this credit. It only has to be the homeowner or the developer. Buildings acquired before January 1st, 2023 got $2,000 a unit. After the Biden administration's changes, you get between $500 and $1,000 a unit without prevailing wage labor. And again, 5 times the value, $2,500 to $5,000 per unit if you do meet the prevailing wage requirement. This might not be a huge deal when it comes to single family homes, right? But if you're talking about like a multifamily high rise, with 300 units in it and you're getting $5,000 a unit, it's a significant amount of money. A little bit about the history of this. Same Energy Policy Act, same reason, we want to stop importing energy and shore up our energy use by the administration. Super popular. It's been, kind of like it's been continued to be renewed, and then again, made permanent with increased benefits in 2022. So buildings before January 1st, 2021, have to get a HERS rating, right? So like a HERS rating is is, for those not familiar, is kind of a certification for low-rise residential buildings, so single-family homes, townhomes, multifamily 4 stories or under. It basically is a rating that based on energy modeling and inspections and other things that allow you to rank your building, your home, with a typical home built according to the 2006 version of the energy code, right? So basically, you have to get rated and meet a minimum HERS rating in order to claim this incentive. That's what it was before 2023. After 2023, you have to get you get the lower end of the incentive by getting an Energy Star certification for new construction or multifamily, or a Zero Energy Ready Home certification for your home, and then you get the higher value. So to summarize, again, for 2003, $2,000 a unit, you got to get a HERS rating of 50 or lower. The lower the number is, the better you are. So you're better than the average building. You get, 50% better than the average building. You get that. And you also have to make sure that 20% of your improvements are due to envelope improvements. So like if you have a building and you're using the same crappy envelope as it was back then, and you get all of your savings by efficient lighting and like space age HVAC, like you don't qualify. They want to make sure that you're already also thinking about passive strategies. So you got $2,000 a unit for doing that. Now you get $500 a unit for the EPA Energy Star certification, and $1,000 a unit for the Zero Energy Ready Homes certification if you don't use prevailing wage labor. If you do use prevailing wage labor, that's increased 5 times, $2,500 per unit for the Energy Star certification, and $5,000 per unit for the Zero Energy Ready Homes certification. Owners and home builders can both claim this again. So no design team, but if you own it or you built it and developed it, you can claim it. Single family homes qualify, even manufactured homes qualify, and multifamily homes qualify. So really anybody working in the home building space who's thinking about efficient buildings can claim this. That's a salient summary of 45L. We're gonna finish up here with the 48 renewable energy and clean energy efficiency tax credit. But before we go there, are there any questions about 45L, the energy efficient homes tax credit, and how to claim it? All right, and if you think of questions, feel free again to stop me. We'll have a few minutes at the end to go over this as well. But again, you can stack these two as well. Like if you are working on a commercial property, like a 10-story multifamily building full of dwelling units, and you Energy Star certify the property, then you can get both the Section 179D tax deduction as well as the 45L tax credit. I would point out that in Washington, D.C., if you are, you don't want to comply with the DC Green Construction Code, complying with LEED and Energy Star is an alternative compliance mechanism, right? So we often see projects that are getting Energy Star certification anyway in Washington, D.C. And if you are doing that, this is literally money on the table that should be collected. So even easier, really. Like if you know that any of your projects have Energy Star, like your antenna should be kind of flashing that somebody should be getting $5, up to $5. All right, so outside of the energy efficiency side, right? Like, so that's all about like reducing our demand. And we saw in those graphs, clearly these regulations have made an effect, like our energy usage has started to flatline. But what about like clean energy, right? Like what about making sure that not only are we, using less energy, but the way that we're generating that energy is clean and efficient, right? Like strip mining coal is like the dirtiest form of energy, right? Like cleanest side is like, all 100% renewables. In the middle, we have things like natural gas, or maybe things like hydroelectric that don't emit but cause, environmental damage. There's a spectrum there. And ultimately, the government was like, how can we convince or incentivize people to, buy clean energy systems, reduce carbon emissions, and of course, again, reduce the amount of energy that we're asking from the grid. And as always, save the government more money than it forgoes in taxes. Enter the Section 48 Renewable Investment Tax Credit. You claim it by submitting, information on your renewable energy system, and there is a form that your tax preparer submits, just like all the other ones. It's not really that difficult. There's two flavors of it. There's one called the investment tax credit. Again, it's a tax credit, not a deduction. So you can claim it even if you don't have a liability. And it pays based on costs. You get up to 50% of your first costs back as a tax credit the next year. It's pretty good. You also get a deduction too. You can depreciate the entire value of your renewable energy system in just 5 years. So you can write off the cost as a business loss, like every 20% of it, like every year for the first 5 years, as opposed to normal NEP systems, which have a 39-year depreciation period, where you only can claim a little business loss. So it's like a double dipping, right? You get like tax credit and also a deduction if you are able to claim the deduction. There's also a production tax credit that pays on generation by renewable energy systems up to $2.81 per kilowatt hour produced, and you also get depreciation. For buildings in DC, it'll never be the production tax credit. That's really if you like have a big solar farm or like like a huge series of your Amazon or something and have a bunch of warehouses out in Arizona, maybe the production tax credit might be better. But for most projects, especially in the DMV, the investment tax credit makes more sense. A little bit about the history of Section 48. This might seem familiar to you. That's because it is, right? It was also implemented during the Energy Policy Act of 2005 by the same administration and the same bill for the same reasons. It's been very popular also for the same reasons, and it's been renewed by every administration since then. And it isn't permanent like the other two, but it has been extended to 2034. And it was made, they increased the value of it quite a bit. And of course, there were, as Biden administration has prioritized now, prevailing wage requirements. So who can claim it? So homeowners can claim it. We're not going to talk about that, but there's also a flavor of this for homeowners. So like if you own a house and want solar panels, there is a federal energy incentive that you claim under the same tax code. However, business owners and even nonprofit entities can claim this tax credit, right? Like that is a big deal. So like if you are a church, if you are a local government, if you are like a police, a government department, like a police station or something like that, you can claim this tax credit. The government has set up a means where you literally get assigned a tax filing number for just the purposes of claiming this credit. You document it, and then you get paid out. So like, we've helped churches do geothermal systems, like we've helped like a homeless shelter put on solar panels, like lots of people who aren't paying taxes can get the money to do this. So that's a big change. That wasn't like that like before the Biden administration, and it really has added value to this incentive. Previously, like I said, it was even capped at $2,000. That was all lifted. It's just so much bigger. It's a much bigger deal now. So what qualifies? Lots of things qualify. So solar photovoltaic, that's the biggest, most common one. That qualifies for an expense. Solar water heaters, like if you for like your condo association, you want to put in one of these for your pool, pretty common. Those are incentivized. If you want to build wind turbines, in our experience, these don't make a lot of sense. Usually on the building level, they make more sense deployed at scale. But if you wanted one on your building, like you could get an incentive for doing it. Again, these apply to large scale projects as well. A big deal, ground source heat pumps, right? So like previously it was mainly geothermal energy, like deep ground, Iceland style, where you're tapping heat from the deep underground. But now ground source heat pumps can qualify. So these are commonly encountered geothermal systems where you have a horizontal well field, like under the grass or in a pond or kind of deep underground. There's lots of other DCSEU webinars and training material talking about these. They're really efficient. They're the most efficient form of heating and cooling that we are really aware of today. It allows you to store the energy heat rejected during the summertime under the ground for pulling it back out and using it to heat your building in the winter, like a squirrel saving nuts. So these systems are super efficient, and they are expensive, but they are incentivized by this, which can bring back the payback to an attractive period. Fuel cell technology also is relevant here. We don't see quite as much of that in the building side, but they are there. and battery storage. So like if you want to get like some on-site storage to save overproduction by your solar panels, or let's just say you want resiliency, right? Like you need some kind of emergency backup system. You don't want to put in gas for a natural gas generator and you want a battery instead, then all of these things can be incentivized using the Section 48 investment tax credit. Important to note is it's not just what's all included. It's not just the devices themselves, but anything that you buy that you wouldn't have otherwise done without this system. So for example, for solar panels, solar PV panels, like you see on the roof, or in a parking lot, right? That includes the cost of the panels, that includes the cost of the conduit, the wiring, the electrical panels, the inverter, all of the electrical, basically distribution equipment downstream of the panel up until where it connects to the utility, all of that qualifies for an incentive. Let's say you put in a high reflectivity roof coating specifically to make the photovoltaic work better. That qualifies for the incentive. Let's say you have to provide a structurally reinforced roof, right? You have to increase the structural cost, the steel cost, because to support the PV. That also can be incentivized. So really the line is any dollars that you wouldn't have spent doing work that supports your implementation of one of these technologies qualifies for the deduction. So for ground source heat pumps, right, like that includes the heat pumps themselves. That includes the piping, right? Like that includes the pumps, that includes the wells, that includes the site work. Anything dollars that you had to spend that you wouldn't have spent, let's say your alternate was a VRF, right? Like anything that you're buying additionally that you wouldn't have done, that can be incentivized. So let's say you were already designing an air handler with ductwork. After you go geothermal, you still have that same air handler with ductwork. All right, sorry, you can't claim that air handler ductwork. But all the new piping and everything that's like leading up to it from your geothermal system, that can be claimed. So that's kind of like the line, right? Like anything that any money or work that you wouldn't have basically exercised without the decision to include this qualifies. How it works. So let's talk about the ITC. This is the one that's like way more common. So basically before, you can kind of see here, until the Biden administration, the base credit was 30%, right? Like if you did this, you could claim 30% of your costs. It was pretty good. In 2022, and 2023 and beyond, after the Biden administration came through, basically the base credit, stayed at 30%, but they nerf it down to 6% if you use, non-prevailing wage requirements. So it becomes a lot less attractive if you're not using, union labor. But if you are, you still get the 30%. And then there's also some force multipliers on top of it. So you get 10% more if you use all domestic content. If you are in a EPA energy community, you get another 10% back. And also there's even some low income bonuses here. So if you're on Indian land, like native land, like if you're, working out in the Great Plains or something like that, you can get another 10%. And also if you're working on a qualified low income economic benefit project, affordable housing, et cetera, you get another 20%. So if you stack this all and you're working on a unicorn project, you can get 50 plus 10 plus 20, 80% back of your first costs as a credit the year after that you spend it, right? So like for these unicorn projects, like it's like no brainer, right? Like there's almost none of these things. If you slash the price by 80%, will the payback be like more than like even like a year, right? Like all of these things save money. So if you can do it, it really saves back. It really saves. In our, even if you can't do this, in our experience for a typical commercial client, claiming just the 30% and then the depreciation that they're allowed to, most of these things in DC pay back in less than 5 or 6 years. Solar photovoltaic, usually less than 5 years. Geothermal, if you look at the delta, you had to buy an HVAC system anyway. Like if you had to buy an HVAC system for $1 million and it's $2 million to buy the geothermal, that delta, right? Like that incremental cost increase, that usually pays back in less than 5 years. Those are the two biggest items. Batteries, those don't usually pay back. But if you want it, like if it's a priority for you, it makes it a lot more. So the path for most of you working on projects in DC will probably be this like ITC approach, getting you 30% plus that depreciation bonus each for the first 5 years. This does go down with time, eventually like phasing out in 2034 with 0% achieved by 2036. But it's been renewed every time that it's happened, right? Like every year since the past 19 years, people are like, this is great, and they keep renewing it. So to me, it's highly likely that, again, but this number will kind of still be at 30% due to political decisions between now and then. I can't promise it. I'm not a fortune teller, but if history is to tell us anything, it's likely to happen. So the other credit, which we'll touch on just a little bit to kind of round things out before opening it up for questions, is the PTC. So, the PTC is based on production. So again, the full rate is $2.75 per kilowatt hour you produce, over time. There's like a 10-year window for claiming this. And then the base credit is like nerfed, right, down to a fifth of that at 55 cents per kilowatt hour. Phases out, but I think it'll be renewed most likely. But, if you're working, I don't think this is as applicable to DC again, but if you're working out in the West Coast or with a client that's data centers or distribution centers and has lots and lots of roof area and is in a very warm, sunny climate, this could be something that's valuable for you to take. But in summary, the ITC for Section 48 is most likely what you'll encounter in DC. Section 45L for energy efficient homes. If you're working on projects that are Energy Star, targeting Energy Star certification, you'll likely pursue it. And last but not least, 179D, the broadest one, tax deduction, is also highly, highly applicable. Folks who are working in the BEPS space, if you own a building that's subject to BEPS regulation, if you are a designer or a consultant that's helping a building owner or developer, manage their BEPS compliance path and minimize their penalties, it is almost a requirement that you should be looking at all of these credits and deductions. These incentives are what make those compliance requirements actually feasible. So it's not just the stick that we're getting. There is also a lot of carrots out there that are claimable in different ways for different reasons. So really encourage everybody to take these in mind, remember them on all the projects and buildings that you work on, and really try to use them to your advantage to advance sustainability in all of your work and in DC specifically. So I'll open it up for any questions from the Okay, if there are no questions, my contact information is available on the screen here. Our firm does help people consult in how to get these incentives and improve energy efficiency. So we're always happy to help building owners, designers, or other consultants, learn how to best leverage these incentives to achieve better buildings. So please feel free to reach out to me if any questions crop up after this event. But otherwise, I'll hold it open one more